bit, you come over here, you wonder if these are straight, you wonder if that should overlap with that, and by how much, and does that disturb that? In other words, you're constantly engaging in the very same critical, the spiral of critical attention that the designer now has to, and the team of designers now has to, when making a new building. That's the design process. It's the design of making a garden like this. It's the experience of sitting meditation. Now, that brings me to the theme of our course, which is dwelling. Now, it's not known exactly when permanent settlement began with human beings. It's a long time ago, 500,000 years ago, 80,000 years, probably 60,000 years ago, something like that. And when we started building buildings is also uncertain. But we do have access to words that have come down to us that talk about that and describe that. The word dwell is one of them. And the word dwell has a long and rich history up to the, I guess, the end of the 15th century. It was a word that had very close relations across many of the Northern European language, which has relevance to me anyway. That's my background, okay? And so that's where I went to understand that etymology. Dwell has roots in the Old English dwellen, in the Anglo-Saxon word dwellian, Old Norse dvol, and I don't know how to pronounce these, Old High German dwellen, and Danish dval. This is a lineage that seems very well founded on ancient needs that are inherent in us, it seems, to express how we persist, how we stay, how we endure and shelter in particular places, and in continuity with that place in terms of nature and tradition. The idea is, to us now, in line with modern definitions, that we are going to abide in an authentic way, with, according to the Oxford, continue for a time and a place, and to remain with the attention fixed. Merriam-Webster says it's to make one's home and to linger in thought or action in a place. These are understandings that suggest a practice, again, of engagement with present conditions that might enhance our existence and our awareness of it. The interesting thing to me is that actually that's not the case at all. These words mean something quite different etymologically. Dwellen actually meant to mislead or to deceive. Dwellian meant to err. Dvol, which was the Old Norse word, meant to delay. The Old German word dwellen meant to hinder, while the Danish dval referred to quote-unquote a stupor. These were words used right through, in some places, right through the beginning of the 19th century to express conditions of being waylaid, of habituation as opposed to awareness, of costume instead of reality, of custom instead of invention, and generally of losing one's grasp on where one was, which seems like the opposite of what we mean. Now, but don't we know what it means? Of course, we know what it means. The thing is, we need to be maybe a little suspicious of the simple idea of dwelling. There's, I'm going to learn too, there's an inherent problem with dwelling that has to do with habit, that yields a kind of a problem of delusion that comes along with dwelling. Because the minute you become habituated in a place and you live there and you use it constantly, is the minute that you cease to see it in a direct, authentic way. You're just not going to be aware of it. Okay? Now, there are people who have argued that we could reach moral or spiritual or cultural authenticity by simply absorbing traditions and following them, as if, if you're like a self-sufficient pioneer or sort of a primitive entrepreneur, these traditions are going to enable you to be authentic in your place. Actually, all of these traditions and habits and customary ways, orthodox ways, conventional ways, might actually be the problem. What you really need is to suspend your automatic belief in where you are right now in terms of what you're expecting, just, to avoid getting caught in that stupor. So there is a suspicion in Zen that is expressed about conventional dwelling. There's the idea that we are born to embody a kind of inattention to where we are in our place, and that the objective in Zen, for instance, is to arrive at a way of abiding in the present that is beyond an attachment to your received ideas, your inherited ideas of exactly what you're looking at, so that when you see something, you basically approach it from a fresh perspective, as if you're perceiving it, not for the first time maybe, but perceiving it in a fresh way. So that the idea is that by practicing this, again, this idea of mastering the fresh perspective on the present reality, you can come to a more authentic dwelling that is not the dwelling that is dwelling, right? It's dwelling beyond dwelling. It's abiding in a way, in a place of no abode. You're not assuming that you've got this figured out or fully perceived at any time. Now, in terms of construction, there's different ways to look at it. For instance, what you make is inseparable from how you make it. A machine-made object or a prefabricated object or a factory object is going to be very different from a craft object. All right, now a craft object, craft objects in general are associated with Zen carpentry and other things because there is something about, first of all, trying to avoid cutting your finger off, about returning to look at what you intended to make and trying to figure out whether it was actually what you had wanted to make. The process of carving something, whether it's whether you make a piano stool, or some kind of, a totem pole, you're going to be constantly going back and forth. And again, that's that spiral thing I talked about in design. It's the constantly going back to the very beginning and thinking about where your original objectives are. The same thing applies to making things as a group, whether you're doing design as a group or building a house as a group. You've got to have the entire group understanding, what this is. And the thing about groups is, the group has to wake up every morning and, in a way, reconsolidate the understanding that it had the day before, and continue every day to do that, always looking back at the original objectives, which might be expressed by drawings, but are probably going to be expressed in human interactions. So I want to just wind up by talking about how the fundamental fact of architecture in the 21st century, due to the way design has evolved into that sort of constant returning, recursive reference to original objectives, to how many people are involved in it. I want to talk about how sitting meditation and gardening all frame the creation of new buildings and for particular institutions, such as for a family or for a business or for a museum, a police station, or a hospital. They frame that as really, when you design a building for an institution, a new building for an institution, you're really designing that institution again, because what you're doing through that circular spiral process, you're turning around and moving through into a definition of the relationship between what is accepted and received as what it is and how it's perceived. So it is possible. I'll make you one last diagram, if I can get this thing to wake up. It is, well, let's see what the program I have here.